18 seconds. From the moment the first round impacted the windshield to the moment the vehicle cleared the fatal zone, the driver had 18 seconds to make a decision that would determine the survival of his crew, the security of his cargo, and the validity of his entire professional existence. Within that sliver of time, a lifetime of training was pitted against a meticulously planned ambush executed by a team of Tier 1 adversaries. The stakes were $5 million in negotiable bearer bonds, 3 human lives, and a single critical principle of close protection. Today, we will dissect that decision. We will examine the anatomy of a perfect ambush and the anatomy of the perfect response. In this business, we have a saying: the vehicle is your weapon, your shield, and your coffin. It is the single most important piece of equipment in any cash-in-transit operation, but its utility is defined entirely by the mindset of the person behind the wheel. Technology provides options. Training provides answers. What transpired on that stretch of isolated highway was a testament to this truth. A violent, kinetic proof of concept where human will became the decisive factor in an equation of ballistics, horsepower, and hostile intent. This is not a story of heroism. It is a clinical study of professional competence under duress. The operation was what the industry refers to as a sweep run. It was the final collection of the day from a series of suburban banking institutions, consolidating assets at a regional hub before final transport to a central vault. These runs are, by their nature, the most vulnerable. They are predictable. The route, while subject to minor daily variations, is constrained by a limited number of viable arteries. The timing, while not exact to the minute, falls within a predictable window dictated by the closing hours of the financial institutions being serviced. An adversary with sufficient resources for surveillance can, over a period of weeks, develop a highly accurate predictive model of the target's movements. This is precisely what happened. The subsequent investigation revealed a catastrophic intelligence failure originating not from within the security company, but from a compromised source within the logistical apparatus of the banking consortium itself. The enemy knew the route, the window of time, and the approximate value of the cargo long before the crew even signed out their vehicle. The asset in question was a purpose-built armored truck manufactured by a specialized security vehicle company known for its robust designs. It was not a modified commercial chassis. It was a ground-up construction based on a heavy-duty truck frame. The vehicle was rated at a B6 level of ballistic protection. In practical terms, this meant the opaque armor and the multi-layered ballistic glass were designed to defeat multiple impacts from high-powered rifle rounds up to and including 7.62 millimeter full metal jacket ammunition. The entire passenger cabin was a sealed armored monocoque, a citadel designed to protect the occupants from direct fire. Its tires were military-grade run flats, capable of sustaining multiple punctures and continuing to operate at reduced speed for up to 50 kilometers. The vehicle weighed approximately 9 tons, powered by a high-torque diesel engine that provided sluggish acceleration but immense motive force. It was a fortress on wheels, but every fortress has its weaknesses. B6 armor, while effective against standard rifle ammunition, is not impervious. It can be defeated by dedicated armor-piercing rounds, and more importantly, its integrity degrades with successive impacts in the same area. The ballistic glass, a laminate of polycarbonate and leaded glass nearly 2 inches thick, is particularly susceptible. While it will stop the initial rounds, the impacts create a network of cracks and a phenomenon known as spalling, where fragments from the interior surface of the glass can break off at high velocity, becoming projectiles within the cabin. Furthermore, the vehicle's weak points were, as is standard, its vision blocks, engine compartment, and tires. The attackers knew this. Their plan was not to penetrate the citadel immediately, but to disable the vehicle and methodically dismantle its defenses. The vehicle was a shield, but it was a temporary one. Its primary function was to buy time. time for the crew to react, time for support to arrive, and time to escape the kill zone. The crew consisted of 3 individuals. The cargo guard, secured in the rear compartment, was responsible for the assets. His role in an engagement was purely defensive, a last line of defense should the cabin be breached. The passenger guard, in the front right seat, was the communications link and designated marksman, equipped with a long rifle fired from reinforced gun ports. His job was to lay down suppressive fire and coordinate with the central dispatch. Then there was the driver. He was a veteran of the industry with over 15 years of experience, a former military police officer who had spent the last decade exclusively in high-risk transport. His training record was exemplary, with advanced certifications in evasive driving, anti-ambush tactics, and vehicle dynamics. He had, according to company records, logged over 2,000 hours in simulator training, practicing this exact type of scenario. He was a seasoned professional, a man whose entire career had been a rehearsal for the next 18 seconds. His psychology, disciplined and conditioned by years of routine, punctuated by high-stress drills, was the single most valuable asset in the convoy. The antagonists were not common criminals. The forensic evidence and tactical signatures recovered after the incident pointed to a highly sophisticated transnational trafficking organization. The assault team was composed of former special operations soldiers from their country of origin, mercenaries who brought a level of military precision to a criminal enterprise. Their operation was not a smash and grab. It was a planned military action. They had conducted extensive reconnaissance, selected their ground with tactical precision, and equipped themselves for a siege. They carried a mix of 5.56 mm and 7.62 mm caliber assault rifles, with some members equipped with armor-piercing ammunition specifically for the vehicle's engine block and vision ports. They were not there to intimidate. They were there to isolate, disable, and execute. Their chosen ambush site was a textbook example of tactical geography. It was a 2-lane stretch of road flanked on one side by a steep wooded embankment and on the other by a concrete retaining wall. This created a natural channel, a man-made canyon that eliminated any possibility of evasive maneuvering to the sides. The road curved gently, limiting visibility for the approaching target vehicle to less than 200 meters. This was the ambush box. A forward vehicle, a heavy-duty pickup truck, would serve as the primary block, while a second vehicle would close the trap from behind. The assault team, consisting of 8 individuals, was positioned on the elevated embankment, providing them with clear fields of fire down into the kill zone. Their position gave them the tactical high ground and excellent cover. They had planned for every contingency except one. The fatal flaw in their otherwise impeccable plan was an intellectual one. It was a flaw born of arrogance, a belief that their target would behave in a predictable, standardized manner. They had studied the security company's standard operating procedures, which, like most in the industry, dictated a defensive posture in the event of an ambush. Standard operating procedure was to stop, return fire from the vehicle's protected positions, and call for backup. The vehicle becomes a static pillbox. This procedure is designed to protect the crew and cargo by relying on the armor to withstand the attack until a response force can arrive. The attackers had planned for this. Their strategy relied on the target vehicle becoming stationary. A stationary target can be systematically disabled. Its tires can be shredded, its engine block destroyed, and its armor breached through concentrated patient fire. Static defense is death. The adversaries had planned for a crew that would follow the rules. At 6:47 p.m. local time, the armored truck rounded the bend, traveling at a steady 60 kilometers per hour. The driver observed the pickup truck parked sideways, completely blocking both lanes of traffic. It was an immediate and unambiguous threat indicator. There is no benign reason for a vehicle to be positioned this way on an isolated road. The driver's mind began a process that tactical psychologists call the OODA loop, a decision-making cycle developed by military strategist John Boyd. It stands for observe, orient, decide, and act. It is a framework for understanding how individuals process information and make decisions in high-stakes, time-sensitive environments. The speed and accuracy with which one can cycle through the OODA loop is often the determining factor between life and death. Observe. A stationary, blocking vehicle. An unnatural silence on the road. The passenger guard later reported that the driver's immediate verbal reaction was not one of panic, but a single focused word. Contact. He had observed the anomaly and instantly categorized it as hostile. This initial observation took less than a second. While a civilian might experience a moment of confusion or normalcy bias, the tendency to believe that things will function the way they normally function, the driver's training had conditioned him to see the scene for what it was, the opening stage of an attack. Orient. The driver oriented himself to the tactical reality. He was in the mouth of a kill zone. His vehicle was a 9-ton armored asset, but its momentum was his primary weapon. To his left was an embankment, an impossible escape route. To his right, a concrete wall. The only way out was forward, through the obstacle, or backward into the closing rear of the trap. He processed the vehicle's capabilities, its mass, its B6 armor, its run-flat tires. He oriented himself not just in space, but within the context of his training scenarios. His brain was accessing thousands of hours of simulated and real-world experience to find the correct tactical solution. This orientation phase took perhaps 2 seconds. During this time, the passenger guard was already reaching for his radio handset, beginning to follow the standard procedure. Decide. Here lies the critical juncture. Standard operating procedure dictated he brake, stop the vehicle at a safe distance, and engage the communications protocol. This is the compliant response the attackers anticipated. The driver, however, made a different calculation. He understood that stopping would cede the initiative entirely to the enemy. It would transform his vehicle from a dynamic weapon into a static target, a metal box waiting to be opened. He calculated the response time for the nearest law enforcement or company support unit, a minimum of 8 minutes, an eternity under concentrated fire. He decided that the only variable he could control was his own vehicle's motion. The blockade was not an impassable barrier. It was a problem to be solved with mass and velocity. His decision was made. Accelerate. Drive through the threat. Act. This entire cognitive process, observe, orient, decide, took place in the 3 to 4 seconds between the initial sighting of the blockade and the first impact of a bullet. At 6:47 and 21 seconds, the first shot was fired. It was a deliberate aim shot from a 7.62 millimeter rifle, striking the driver's side of the windshield. The impact created a spiderweb of cracks, but did not penetrate. This was not suppressive fire. It was a psychological shot, designed to induce panic and force the driver to brake. It was a tactical question posed in the language of ballistics. What will you do now? The driver's action was his answer. Instead of hitting the brake, his foot pressed down on the accelerator. The diesel engine roared as the 9-ton vehicle began to build speed. This was the moment the attackers' plan began to unravel. They had anticipated a stop, a static firefight. They had not anticipated a charge. At 6:47 and 24 seconds, 3 seconds after the first shot, the assault team opened up with everything they had. The vehicle was hammered by a sustained barrage of automatic weapons fire from the embankment. The sound inside the cabin was described by the passenger guard as deafening, a percussive hailstorm of metal on metal. Dozens of rounds struck the windshield and side windows, the impacts overlapping, turning the once clear ballistic glass into a translucent, fractured mess. Spalling became a real concern, with small, sharp fragments of the interior glass layer breaking loose inside the cabin, causing minor lacerations to the two guards in the front. The passenger guard, jarred by the violence of the impacts and the driver's unexpected acceleration, abandoned his attempt to use the radio. His priority now was to brace for impact. The vehicle accelerated from 60 to nearly 80 kilometers per hour in the short distance remaining. The driver was not aiming for a gap. He was aiming for the center mass of the blocking pickup truck. This was a critical choice. Ramming an obstacle head-on allows the vehicle's frame to absorb the maximum amount of force, and it offers the highest probability of clearing the path. The physics of the situation were stark. A 9-ton armored vehicle moving at 80 kilometers per hour carries an immense amount of kinetic energy. The pickup truck, weighing perhaps 2.5 tons, was a negligible obstacle. At 6:47 and 27 seconds, 6 seconds into the engagement, the armored truck struck the blockade. The impact was catastrophic for the smaller vehicle. The pickup was thrown aside as if it were a child's toy, its frame crumpling and twisting as the armored behemoth plowed through it without a significant loss of speed. The sound of the collision was a brutal shriek of tearing metal that was audible even over the continuous gunfire. The driver, trained for this moment, did not flinch. He maintained his grip on the wheel, fighting the torque of the impact to keep his vehicle moving straight. He had breached the first line of the trap. The attacker's rear blocking element, a large sport utility vehicle, was already moving to close the ambush envelope from behind. But the driver's decisive action had disrupted their timing. By refusing to stop, he had compressed their entire operational timeline. They had expected minutes to work. They were given mere seconds. The rear blocking vehicle, now faced with a target moving away at speed, was forced into a pursuit role for which it was not prepared. Furthermore, the wreckage of their own primary blockade now partially obstructed their path, forcing them to maneuver around it and costing them valuable seconds. As the armored truck cleared the kill zone, its front end heavily damaged but its engine still running, the attackers' fire became less accurate. They were now firing at a receding, moving target from an oblique angle. Several rounds impacted the rear of the vehicle, and a concentrated volley successfully shredded the two rear tires. But the run-flat system performed exactly as designed. The reinforced sidewalls held their shape, and while the vehicle's handling became sluggish and unstable, it remained controllable. The driver did not slow down. He knew that distance was now his shield. Every meter he put between his vehicle and the kill zone increased their chances of survival exponentially. The entire kinetic phase of the engagement, from the first shot to the vehicle clearing the effective range of the ambush, lasted less than 30 seconds. In that time, the attackers had fired an estimated 200 rounds. The armored truck had sustained over 70 impacts to its body and glass. Yet, not a single round had penetrated the crew's citadel. The driver continued for another 2 kilometers, the damaged truck groaning in protest, before pulling into a well-lit, populated service station. Only then, with the immediate threat neutralized and in a position of relative safety, did he allow the vehicle to come to a stop. Only then did the passenger guard successfully make the call to dispatch, reporting the attack and their location. The aftermath was a study in contrasts. For the security crew, the outcome was a tactical victory. The driver and passenger guard sustained minor cuts and bruises from spalling and the violent collision. The cargo guard in the rear was unharmed. The $5 million in bearer bonds was completely secure. The vehicle, however, was functionally destroyed. Its front axle was bent, the radiator was punctured, and the entire front bodywork was a mangled ruin. Every single panel on the vehicle's left side and front was peppered with bullet impacts. The ballistic glass was a mosaic of fractures, opaque and useless. The two rear tires were completely destroyed. The vehicle had performed its final duty. It had served as a shield and a weapon, and it had successfully prevented itself from becoming a coffin. It was a total loss, but it was a loss the company would gladly accept. For the antagonists, the outcome was a complete and utter failure. Their return on investment was zero. They had expended significant resources on intelligence, planning, and equipment for no material gain. More importantly, they had lost the initiative and exposed themselves. The crew's survival and immediate report to authorities meant that a rapid law enforcement response was inbound. The attackers were forced into a chaotic retreat. In their haste to flee the scene, they left behind crucial evidence, including shell casings and a damaged piece of equipment that would later prove instrumental in their identification. Subsequent police action, guided by intelligence derived from the failed ambush, resulted in the arrest of several key members of the cell within the following weeks. Their casualties during the event itself were unconfirmed, but blood trails found at the ambush site indicated at least one of their members had been wounded, likely by ricochets or fragments from their own rounds striking the hardened vehicle. They had planned a perfect ambush, but they had failed to account for the human element. The tactical analysis of this incident yields several critical lessons that are now integral to advanced training curricula in the security industry. It is a synthesis of the interplay between technology, intelligence, and human factors. The success of the outcome was not a single point of victory, but a chain of interconnected factors. The technology worked. The B6 armor held. The run-flat tires functioned. The vehicle's sheer mass was a decisive tool. Without this level of protection, the driver's decision to accelerate would have been suicidal. The equipment bought the crew the most precious commodity in any firefight: time. It absorbed the initial onslaught and gave the driver the seconds he needed to think and act. However, the incident also highlights a significant institutional failure. The operation was compromised from the start by an intelligence leak. This underscores the fundamental principle that the most formidable armor and the best-trained crew are irrelevant if the enemy knows where you will be and when you will be there. The fight was nearly lost before it even began. Security is a holistic discipline. It is not just about hardened vehicles and armed guards. It is about counter-surveillance, information security, and vetting procedures. The most dangerous threats often originate not from the barrel of a gun, but from a quiet betrayal in an office building miles away. The core of the analysis, however, must focus on the failure of the antagonist. Their plan was sophisticated, their execution initially precise, but their entire strategy was predicated on a single flawed assumption: that the target would follow protocol. They planned for compliance. They expected the driver to stop, to turn his vehicle into a stationary fort, to play by a set of rules they had already studied and prepared to defeat. Their intellectual arrogance was their undoing. They failed to plan for an opponent who would refuse to be a willing victim, who would break the established script and choose a course of action that was high-risk, aggressive, and unconventional. They failed to account for human willpower. This leads to the four distilled lessons from this engagement. First, intelligence security is the foundation of all physical security. A compromised plan cannot be salvaged by tactical excellence alone. Second, in the context of an ambush, static defense is death. Mobility is life. The moment a vehicle in a kill zone stops moving, the balance of power shifts irrevocably to the attacker. Third, equipment buys time, but training determines outcomes. The armored truck was the shield that allowed the driver to survive long enough to make a decision. His training was the weapon that made it the right decision. Technology is a tool, not a solution. It is the trained mind that wields it effectively. The fourth and final lesson is the most crucial for the evolving landscape of professional security. Methodology must evolve to match the sophistication of the threat. The old playbook of stop and report is a relic from an era of less professional adversaries. Modern threats, often employing military tactics and intelligence-gathering capabilities, require a more dynamic and aggressive defensive doctrine. The driver in this incident did not invent a new tactic. He executed a doctrine of aggressive defense that is now becoming the new standard. The principle is simple. Never cede the initiative. The fight goes to those who can control the tempo of the engagement, who can force the enemy to react to them. In the final summation, the event was a victory not for a company or a piece of technology, but for a philosophy. It was a validation of a training regimen that prioritizes psychological conditioning and decisive action over passive reliance on armor. The driver did not perform a miracle. He performed a procedure. It was a procedure he had practiced hundreds of times in a simulator and thousands of times in his mind. He had built what we call a mental bridge, the psychological crossing point where training ceases to be a theoretical exercise and becomes an instinctive, immediate action. When the first round struck his windshield, he did not have to think about what to do. He simply had to cross that bridge. The 18 seconds on that road were the culmination of 15 years of professional discipline. It demonstrates that in the final analysis, when a meticulously laid plan collides with a prepared mind, the outcome is not determined by the weight of armor or the volume of fire. It is determined by the individual who can observe, orient, decide, and act while their world is disintegrating around them. The vehicle was savaged, the crew was shaken, but the mission was successful. The cargo was secure because the man behind the wheel understood the most fundamental rule of surviving an ambush. The fight goes to those who understand that the only way out of the kill zone is through it. And a debrief.